Officially, there is no biblical prophecy that denotes the time as a sign of the times for the rapture of the church. We've always contended that the rapture is a signless event. Down through the centuries, from the days of the Bible until this very day, the rapture has always been taught as imminent. On today's Prophecy in the News, however, we're going to be taking a look at the past 50 or so years and consider the possibility that the super sign that the Bible indicates that will happen before anything else in the end time can take place may also include the rapture of the church. Gary Stimmer is here to discuss with me Roadmap to the Rapture.
Oh yes, JR, we hear a lot about the roadmap to peace today, and a lot of us are maybe a little skeptical about that roadmap to peace because really it involves the appeasement of the PLO and sort of giving them what they want in the hopes that they will then turn peaceful. So far there haven't been too many signs of that. In fact, the PLO charter, which has never been denied nor altered since it was first drafted, specifically states that one of the tenets of the PLO is that it will one day oversee the complete destruction of Israel, the driving of the Jews into the sea. And JR, with that in mind, we need to take a new look at Israel, I think, because I think there's a thought today that maybe Israel is past history, passé. Israel seems to be sort of going down the drain. Nothing is happening there. And I've even heard some people preaching that modern Israel has nothing to do with prophecy whatsoever. Just kind of forget about it. Let those people go where they may. Modern Israel, born May 14th, 1948, it's just an illusion that it has something to do with prophecy. I beg to differ.
You know, we're going to look at some of the writings of theologians prior to 1948 to show how that it was commonly taught that Israel must become a nation before the tribulation period can set in. If the Antichrist is going to commit the abomination of desolation on the Temple Mount, as Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 says, he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, then there has to be a Jewish temple or a form of worship of some kind with sacrifices in order for that to occur. Now, the rapture has always been taught as imminent. Therefore, there is no official sign. But since Israel has become a nation, we can say safely, since the rapture hasn't taken place, that God had that in mind for Israel to become a nation before the rapture. And with the taking of East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount in 1967, since the rapture has not come to pass yet, we could say that God had this in mind to occur before the rapture. Though we cannot officially say that they were signs of the times, we know that as the events now are nearing, especially with this roadmap to peace, the establishment of a Palestinian state, the rapture must be near. It must be very near.
Must be very near. JR, let's begin in the 19th century. This is fascinating to me because E.W. Bullinger wrote this book called The Witness of the Stars in 1893. That's a long time ago. And in this book, he basically started, among other things, with the idea that there would be Gentile domination over Jerusalem until a certain point. Luke 21:24, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. That's referring to the Jews. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Bullinger scratched his head, and he was big on timing and looking at dates. For example, the date of the foundation of Babylon, the date of the foundation of Medo-Persia, the date of the foundation of Rome, and he sort of put all these dates together, and he came up at the end of the book with 2 or 3 interesting statements. Here's one of them I'll quote. He says, though Jews are returning thither, that is to Israel, in ever-increasing numbers, yet they are only strangers there. They have as yet no independent position, nor can they make any treaties. But when these times shall end, it means that they will have a position of sufficient independence to make a treaty or a league with the coming prince. Now, he said that back in 1893, Jay.
Yes, the Antichrist is going to make a treaty with Israel, so there has to be a nation an organization of Jews with the ability to make a treaty with this Antichrist.
He concludes this general statement with this quote, which I find most fascinating. He's talking about times and seasons here, and he says, these times and seasons have nothing whatever to do with the church of God, 1 Thessalonians verse 1. The mystical body of Christ, whenever its members are complete, will be taken up to meet the Lord, the head of the body, in the air, so as to be ever with the Lord. And as he goes on, he makes this statement, therefore we're not dealing here, that is in discussing the times and seasons,
yes,
we're not dealing here with the coming of the Lord, either for his saints or with them. We're not referring to what is commonly called the end of the world. We are merely pointing out that the end of Gentile domination over Jerusalem is drawing near. Now he wrote that in 1893. He was looking forward to the state of Israel in 1893. Well, 4 years later, the First Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland convened with the very idea. The central issue was the foundation of the state of Israel, 1897. So he was 4 years ahead of his time. Isn't that interesting?
How about that? Now, the problem, I think, that, shall we call them date setters?
Yeah.
The problem with date setters is they try to set the time of the rapture. That can't be done. Jesus said, no man knows the day nor the hour. However, we can see the events transpiring around us throughout the entire last century, and especially with the momentum going now, that the state of Israel has to be in a position to go through Jacob's trouble soon. Everything is moving very quickly in that direction. Where the rapture of the church fits in there, we can only say that we're convinced that the Bible teaches a pre-tribulation rapture. So if the tribulation period is coming soon, then the rapture is coming soon.
Not only this, but in the New Testament, we're very clearly told in a couple of places that when the rapture comes, it'll be at a time when everybody is talking about peace and safety. They're talking about perhaps the beauty of a new world order, a new international stability, and they're looking toward good times. They're not in the middle of something horrible. Rather, they're looking at a world which they think will be under their control soon, and there will be world peace, and everything will be fine. And it's at that point, writes Paul in 1 Thessalonians, that there will be a sudden disappearance of the church.
Now, Gary has written an article for our June magazine. It's the title article, just inside the front cover. And it's entitled, Israel Roadmap to Peace or Roadmap to the Rapture. It's a fascinating piece of research. Gary, tell us about Mr. Kenneth Wiest and what he had to say about this over 50 years ago.
This is amazing. Kenneth Wiest, Moody Bible Institute, that brilliant man. He wrote a 4-volume series called Wiest's Word Studies, and essentially, J.R., he was the chairman of the New Testament Greek department at Moody and was a brilliant Greek scholar. In these volumes, he also commented on various theological points. Among them, it's talking about the rapture of the church. And one of his articles is called Jesus of Nazareth, His Coming for His Church. He's laying out the terms of the rapture in this article, and I'm going to quote a couple things he said. This is back, J.R., really right after Israel had become a nation, 1951. So that's 3 years later. And he says, the language of the New Testament prophecy is clear that the believer is not to expect him, that the believer is to expect him at any moment, not to look for him in connection with some predicted event, for which signs have been given to Israel and not to the church. Now that's an important statement to remember.
Yes, it is.
Signs have been given to Israel in the Bible, and of which there are many, many signs, of Daniel, Revelation, so forth, but not to the church. He continued, events on earth are not yet in readiness for the Great Tribulation. Indeed, at this writing, 1951, That period cannot come for years yet, but the Lord may return for his church at any moment. And then he concludes, all indications point to the fact that the second advent is near at hand. The church has been in existence for almost 2,000 years, he says. It would seem logical that God would repeat his custom of doing something of great importance at or near the turn of these two millenniums, that is, within the next half century or so. That would be his coming to earth a second time. But the rapture must take place before the second advent, all of which means that we are fast approaching the wind-up of things. The rapture could occur within the next 50 years or so, writes Kenneth Wiest in 1951. He's watching Israel.
He's, what, about 3 years overdue now?
About 3 years.
Something like that. But you know, hey, it's closer than ever before. We'll talk about this when we come back in just a moment. Dr. Kenneth Wiest made the statement a little over 50 years ago. His statement, Gary, primarily concerned the second advent of Christ, that is, his return in power and great glory at the end of 7 years of tribulation. But still, Kenneth Wiest is not far off.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, he didn't set a date, but only was looking at the times and seasons approach and saying, from his context, a very exciting time in which he wrote. 1951, the foundation of Israel, Israel's first war, was still fresh in his mind, and he was saying, as I look ahead from this perspective, I see the year 2000, and it will have been 2,000 years since the birth of Christ, and it is the Lord's custom, if you look back through history, to do things on a millennial basis. And he's reasoned from that the second coming should be right around the year 2000. Well, I don't think that's out of line at all.
Well, you know, this is what he said exactly. All of which means we're fast approaching the windup of things. The rapture should occur within the next 50 years or so. That's setting a date for the rapture.
Yes.
Albeit, he said, or so. 50 years or so.
Yeah.
So, that means that the rapture is closer today than ever before. What are some of the other scriptures, Gary, concerning this?
Well, of course, there's a famous scripture in Ezekiel 36 that really should be taken in context. Ezekiel 36, 37, 38, 39 draws a very graphic picture of Israel being gathered out of the nations. For I will take you from among the heathen and gather you out of all countries and bring you into your own land. That's Ezekiel 36:24. And J.R., as you go back and look at Ezekiel in detail, you discover that the context of Ezekiel looks very much like what we see in the Middle East today. It's very recognizable.
And of course, the Valley of Dry Bones in the next chapter, you know, where first the bones come together, and then the sinew upon the bones, and then God breathes, and the Spirit of life comes in, and they stand upon their feet a mighty army. And the north and south are no longer divided; they're together again. This is what we have seen, I think, in this last century.
The point is that Israel has been called God's ticking timepiece, the super sign, whatever you want to call it. I still believe that Israel is the great point of reckoning by which the modern era is measured. And Jared, the devil obviously hates Israel. That is so obvious when you look at world news and you look at the bad press Israel's getting today.
I like your use of Haggai's prophecy there. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You go back to, and we're doing a lot of bouncing back and forth, but when you go back to the time of the taking of Jerusalem, back on December 9th, 1917, General Allenby of Britain staged an invasion against the Turks, who then occupied Israel and Jerusalem, and he launched northward, eventually winding up in Damascus. But he freed Jerusalem on December 9th, 1917. And when he did, it just happened to be that that date was Hanukkah, 1917, the 24th of Kislev. And the prophet Haggai, and I need to turn back there, but the prophet Haggai had a very specific, very, very specific prophecy.
Yeah, Haggai 2:18.
Haggai 2:18. Do you have that there?
Well, I've got it. That's all right. Go ahead.
But Haggai pointed toward the prophecy concerning Hanukkah, and he said, consider now from this day and upward. I think that's very interesting.
Yes.
Consider from this day and upward. In other words,
it's a time marker.
It's a time marker.
It begins a series of events, not just an event by itself, but it's the beginning of something incredible.
And the next phrase, even from the 24th day of the 9th month, that's when Allenby took Jerusalem. Even from the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid. Consider it. Well, you know, J.R., this is fascinating because the foundation of the temple was laid in an interesting way. This refers forward to the time when Antiochus IV Epiphanes invaded Jerusalem and took over the temple, and it was cleansed. Yes. And rededicated on the 24th day of the 9th month. And so the Second Temple was basically rededicated on that day. But that day came to be known as the Day of Dedication, and the importance of it is that temple building is focused around this date. Now you could say when Allenby took Jerusalem, he set in motion the events that would eventually cause the temple to be rebuilt. And I have read a number of commentators from the early 20th century who took it to prophecy exactly that way. When Allenby took Jerusalem, it's just a matter of time until the temple would be rebuilt.
Fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
Well, let's talk about this Near East report for a few moments. Time's getting away from us here. Facts and Myths, October 15th, well, it was 1978. The Near East report gives this. Tell us about it, Gary.
Yeah, they have an interesting quote here. Myths and Facts said, quote, on May 15th, 1948, this is the day after statehood, Israel's declaration of independence extended friendship to her neighbors. On the same day, 5 Arab armies invaded the partitioned territory. As Egyptian and Jordanian armies swept into Israel, they also occupied the land that was to have been the Arab state. Jordan later annexed the West Bank. Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. Thus, it was Egypt and Jordan, not Israel, which thwarted the birth of a Palestinian Arab state. Israel in 1948 claimed only those areas allotted to her by the partition plan and the adjustments caused by the ceasefire lines of the 1948 war. That is all Israel held for almost 20 years. And they're referring there to the taking of the Temple Mount in 1967. Yeah. But
I've never heard Jordan and Egypt condemned for that, you know.
Isn't that amazing?
UN?
No, not really. You don't hear the UN standing up and condemning them for that at all. But here's the thing. This date, May 14th, 1948, was a 50-year span of time from the first Zionist Congress back in 1897, then 1898, Second Zionist Congress, so forth. JR, it's interesting that there was a 50-year span of time from that Zionist Congress to the UN mandate and then to statehood. It's as though things are being marked off in 50-year time spans. But what happened to Israel then in the year 2000? Kenneth Weiss was looking forward and saying, it's likely that something important would happen. We look at Israel, what happened? Yeah. Sharon tried to take the Temple Mount in 1991, leading to the present Intifada. And you know, JR, that Intifada has gone from 91, 92, right up to the present date. Has the temple been rebuilt? No. What's going on? Should we just kind of throw up our hands and say, oh, Israel's not worth watching? I don't think so.
Oh, no. But I can tell you the Palestinians are determined to push Israel into the Mediterranean, yes, even to this very day. You have some interesting news here from Foreign Minister Farouk Kaddoumi, interviewed in April of this year by the Jordanian newspaper Al Arab. His comments, quoted in WorldNet Daily, were a rare and honest appraisal of what the Palestinian leaders really believe. Tell us what he said.
Well, referring to Israel, he said, if Israel wants to leave the Gaza Strip, then it should do so. That means the Palestinian resistance has forced it to leave. But the resistance will continue. Let Gaza Strip be South Vietnam. We'll use all available methods to liberate North Vietnam. By which he inferred that if Gaza is South, if Israel is North Vietnam, we're going to take the whole thing.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? Well, I want you to know that recently, on April 28th through May the 1st, the World Muslim Scholars met in Cairo in the 16th session of the International Islamic Conference, at which time they called for Sharia Islamic law to become a part of international law. I sure hope the United Nations doesn't pay any attention to that, because, listen, on April 29, 2004, Governor Ahmed Sani of the African state of Zamfara, under his newly organized Islamic law, called for the demolition of all churches. Wow, incredible. We'll be back in just a moment. Will Israel pull out of Gaza? Is Gaza another South Vietnam? What's the upshot, Jerry?
Well, the upshot is this, J.R. Zephaniah has a prophecy against Gaza. Zephaniah 2:5, woe to the inhabitants of the seacoast, the nation of the Cherethites, the word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, the land of the Philistines. You know, the Palestinians have taken the name Philistine as their theme name, and they're called here the nation of the Cherethites. J.R., in Hebrew, Cherethite is a running assassin or a terrorist. Thus we see that events in modern Israel are quite visible in the Bible. The bottom line, keep watching Israel.
Yeah. One of these days, Israel, according to Zephaniah, will occupy the Gaza Strip. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.